Hello, my name is Mage and welcome to Black and White Thinking. Today's video is going to be a quick, fun, hopefully, messy video breaking down a few things that we saw in the recent trailers and teasers for Harley Quinn Season 3. I just have a few things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to look over the trailer again. Why not do that with you guys? If you like crappy Harley Quinn content, please consider subscribing to the channel. I really appreciate it. So after a 2-year break, we're finally at the finish line and about to start Season 3. And better late than never, we were also gifted 2 trailers earlier this month, a teaser and a slightly longer one, more plot focused. The trailers helped fill in a lot of what we already knew about Season 3, from AMAs, interviews, tweets, and just general audience perception, but it also offered us a few surprises. So let's break the main trailer down and compare it with some of the other things we know in order to try and deduce what's in store for us. And more specifically, Harley and Ivy. The Season 3 trailer opens with Harley giving her YouTuber intro.
Oh, hello ladies, gentlemen, theys and gays!
Before we cut very quickly to a moody, broody Dick Grayson, who seems to be returning to Gotham and being picked up by Alfred on the same Greyhound as Harley and Ivy. Nightwing's appearance was announced months ago, a year ago maybe? And he is to be played by What We Do in the Shadows, which, by the way, is one of my favourite shows of all time. You should absolutely go and watch it. If you've seen the film, the show's better.
We also have Evan, the immortal princess of the undead.
You don't have to say my whole name. You can just say Evan. It's fine.
Or just Evan.
Nightwing is going to be played by What We Do in the Shadows, Harvey Guillen, which, legendary, would love to see it. All my favourite things coming together. Now, we also have the episode list for the season and the episode air dates, and it seems like the first 3 episodes of the season might be all airing at the same time on the premiere date. I'm assuming the first episode, being that it's called Harlivy, spoilers, is gonna be something akin to the Eat, Bang, Kill comics, a recap of that kind of stuff, a bit more of establishing Harley and Ivy as girlfriends, breaking Clay and King out of prison, settling back down, stuff like that. In the trailer you can see them returning to Gotham, being gay, and discussing a grand plan that they seem to have come up with. Now, this is where the plot comes in a bit heavier for what I think Season 3 is going to tend to focus on. Originally, when Season 3 was announced, Patrick Schumacher and Justin Halpern mentioned how there would be a lot of Ivy flashbacks in this season, and later on, once they'd actually began production, they discussed how it would be less flashbacks, but still very Ivy focused. And I think from the trailer we can see what they mean by that. Another thing they've both said is that Harley and Ivy are not going to break up this season, which seems like a strange thing to promise as a writer, but writing for queer characters in this modern era requires a certain nuance to completely satisfy your audience, rightly so after all the years of crap we've been through. So I'm not particularly worried about Harley and Ivy coming out of this season as anything other than a couple, hopefully a healthy and happy one. But I don't imagine it's going to be easy, and I guess that's part of the fun, right? Especially and only if it's written well. Obviously we can't judge that yet. Now in the trailer we see, like I said, Harley and Ivy talking about a plan that they have. Now I'm not sure Harley's direct line about a plan relates to Ivy's plan, but I think it might. It seems like there is a specific plot around Gotham, much like there was in Season 2 and New Gotham, that Harley and Ivy are going to return to town with. And this is where the show begins to feel a little comics adjacent. The show has always felt comic adjacent. It's very much based in a lot of Batman animated stuff and also stuff from the Jimmy and Amanda era of comics. However, this trailer clearly sets up some obvious character arcs for Harley and Ivy that reflect a lot of what's going on in the comics at the moment. In the comics at the moment, and for the last few years, there has been a push to stop identifying Harley Quinn as a villain, which I think is personally stupid as hell. But part of the reason that DC have wanted to rebrand Harley as a hero rather than a villain is because she makes them a lot of money. She is arguably more, oh god, I hate to say this, but in the recent years she has become more marketable and more recognizable than even Wonder Woman, perhaps even Superman. She's not Batman, but the fact that she's beating what has been the golden trio of superheroes for over 50 years, I would argue closer to 80, is kind of insane. And I've said this before as someone that is a Harley Quinn fan and has been long before Harley was ever brought to live action, which in my opinion is where a lot of this really took off. It hasn't always been like this. This is quite a modern thing. And this show, I've said this before in other videos, feels like an audience tester sometimes for ideas they want to play around with, like Harley and Ivy being together for more than, a week at a time. The comics does this thing where they're like, Harley and Ivy are together, but not like actually. Another video for another time. The fact that Harley and Ivy's arcs in this season are very clearly going to reflect arcs that are similar to the comics only makes me think that even more. And again, like, total side note here, but it's amazing to me how far we've come in about 10 years as someone who has been a fan of Harley for well over 20. Because that first 10 years of my Harley associated life were really quiet. Nobody cared. She was just the Joker's girlfriend. Now, like, everyone and their grandmother knows who Harley Quinn was. I very specifically remember having a conversation with my partner about 9 years ago, and we were discussing how we probably wouldn't see, for another 30 years or something, a Batwoman and a Harley adaptation. We were even discussing at the time I would probably never get a Wonder Woman film. Which, crazy to think of now. We've had Batwoman, terribly, Harley, mediocre, and Wonder Woman, yeah. I don't know, it's just mad to see that these female characters have actually been brought to the screen, small screen, big screen, and part of me regrets ever wanting it in the first place. Anyway, back to the trailer. So we see Harley and Ivy talking about this plan. Ivy mentions that she wants to terraform Gotham and reclaim it from humans, which, very Ivy. We see some going back and forth about this. We see Ivy doing goddess shit, and we see Harley doing superhero shit, hanging out with the Bat Kids and going on a mission with them, it looks like. And this seems to be the biggest source of tension between the two. Superhero Harley, destroy the Earth, goddess Ivy. Again, this is what is happening in the comics at the moment, and it's crazy to me that, like, Ivy is a villain, but Harley is a superhero. Ivy has the most human goal of all of the characters in Gotham, even though she is played as the most inhuman. She literally just wants to save the world. That is the most archaic and human and heroic of all story archetypes. It has been for thousands of years. Harley is a doctor who is unethical, sleeps with multiple of her patients, and enjoys murder without a cause. Now, I love them both, but I just think it's crazy that out of the two of them, that Ivy is considered the more villainous. I think that says a lot about feminism. To be perfectly honest. If you want to know more about that, you should go watch my last Ivy video. I'm curious how this comic-adjacent storytelling will play out, because a lot of the things that this show has done that are similar to the comics don't necessarily end up like the comics. So I am mildly hopeful to see Goddess Ivy and Superhero Harley maybe approached a little differently than the comics usually do. And I do love seeing Harley as part of the Bat fam. I know for a fact that Bruce and all of his children have a soft spot for all of the Gotham City Sirens, because none of the Gotham City Sirens are really villains, let's be real. They are anti-heroes, and I think that's part of DC's issue at the moment, is that they've forgotten that anti-heroes can exist. We see Harley teaming up with the Bat fam, which again makes the most sense, because when Harley is at her most sane, which she is because she's with Ivy and we saw a bunch of growth last season, she's also at her most shrink. We see references to a new Shark Daddy episode. We had one last season. A lot of people hated it. I thought it was fine. Again, we get more Nightwing. Clearly, we're going to get some Babs Dick content. They seem to be trying to escape from Firefly here. You can also see a reference to Mad Hatter, the Court of Owls, which I'm not really sure exactly actually how the Court of Owls storyline is going to play out. I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, and at this point I think it might just be a gag. So I'm not going to hover on it too much. You can see references to the musical episode. I think that's what this shot of the Joker with two Harleys is from. I'm going to assume that has something to do with Music Meister, who is an old DC villain. There's quite a few references here to some old DC villains. We can see the Joker running for mayor, an obvious Joker Joaquin Phoenix film reference. I could probably say a lot about the undeserved redemption of Joker in this show, but I also think the representation of the Joker in this show could be worse. And again, that's another conversation for another day, another video maybe. I enjoy the kind of what if vibes of the Joker in this show, even if this isn't necessarily how I would use the Joker in a Harley solo show, if that makes sense. I'm a huge fan of Alan Tudyk though, and I think his Joker is really refreshing. No beef to Mark Hamill, but again, Alan Tudyk has brought an interesting new level of depth that I think the Joker's been lacking in animation for a while. And just Alan Tudyk is fucking good at everything he does. He's never had a bad performance. We can see Jazz Fest references, which make me laugh every time as someone that has a local Jazz Fest every year. Jazz Fest is mentioned multiple times in season 1 and 2. Ivy talks about wanting to go to Jazz Fest with the lasso. You see it on chevrons, on the news, running gag, tush. In the teaser, there's a few interesting shots. There's this one of Selena with a whip. She seems to be surrounded by flowers, so I'm curious if she's fighting Ivy here. And there's also this shot of Ivy, which kind of looks like Ivy has been possessed by Psycho again. Psycho, who's remarkably weirdly absent from the trailer mostly. So I think there might be something going on there. There seems to be a difference between Ivy here, or godlike, and Ivy here, or possessed, I would say. We can see James Gunn's cameo. I hate James Gunn. I think he's a bad director and an even worse person, and that's my opinion. He's a homophobe and a lesbophobe who should never be allowed near Harley and Ivy. And the fact that he's in this show does not fill me with hope for a future where James Gunn isn't the one directing the Harley and Ivy solo movie. I would rather just not have one than James Gunn make it. He's a dangerous person to be around queer women. And if you don't know why, just Google James Gunn Batwoman. Now back to Ivy terraforming Gotham. Again, I think that's going to be probably the biggest bulk of the plot in this season, lasting from about episode 5 to episode 10. There are only 10 episodes in this season, by the way, less than the last 2. Episode 5 is called It's a Swamp Thing, and I assume this episode, you see Harley and Ivy in this shot with Nora, and then you see Nora making out with Alec here. I'm pretty sure Ivy's issues, especially around environmentalism and this whole going god crazy thing that the comics likes to do, it's going to be triggered by Swamp Thing. Probably. That's quite often something that happens in the comics. Ivy and Swamp Thing have had a long relationship in the comics. They know each other from college, they both work under Jason Woodrow, and they're kindred spirits, let's say. And I think based on what we've seen in the last 2 seasons, Ivy might start comparing herself to someone like Swamp Thing or another villain, anti-hero, eco-terrorist that she sees as doing more than her. I imagine Ivy will enjoy being with Harley, but will see it, as she did in the first 2 seasons, as a distraction from her larger mission. And when Harley does, as we see in the trailer, imply that what Ivy wants to do is wrong, in the same way that Ivy did with Harley last season with the parademons, Ivy's going to lean into the god thing. The last episode of the season is called The Horse and the Sparrow, and as far as I'm aware, and I've looked into this as best as I can, The Horse and the Sparrow refers to trickle-down economics.
The trickle-down theory. This argues that if you lower costs for corporations by cutting their taxes, businesses use those savings to invest. The thinking was more money for corporations would mean more jobs and higher wages for workers and thus increased spending. But trickle-down is a controversial idea. Opponents argue that when corporate taxes are cut, domestic social programs suffer.
Trickle-down economics is essentially a fallacy, and as far as people are concerned, the horse and the sparrow is essentially an earlier term for trickle-down economics. The idea being that if you feed a horse, eventually that horse will shit, and the sparrow can eat his shit. The circle of life continues. However, badly for the sparrow. When you apply this to kind of economics and class, the idea is that a lot of conservative economists push the idea that if you instill wealth in the wealthy, that wealth will then be shit out and eaten up by the poor. And obviously for the poor, this means nothing. It means that they are digging through shit or something the horse is being given for free. It's simply a metaphor for class. The rich are horses and the poor are sparrows eating their shit. More interestingly, and what I think this last season title might be in reference to, is a punk song I found. Now, in the second season of Harley Quinn, there is a reference to Lost. Well, maybe not Lost, because Lost actually references a album by Peter Townsend. The episode I'm talking about is All the Best Inmates Have Daddy Issues. There is an episode of Lost called All the Best Cowboys Have Daddy Issues. There is a Peter Townsend episode called, very weird racist title, but not actually relevant to the music in any way. Obscure music references have already been a thing in this show. I found a punk band from Stockholm called Victims who have a song called The Horse and the Sparrow. Actually, they have a whole album called The Horse and the Sparrow, The Horse and the Sparrow being the title track. And on this track and the rest of the album, the band very loudly talks about environmentalism, climate change, class issues, and how the rich are going to kill us all if we don't do something about it, and that the world is going to burn. I think that's probably more likely the reference, right? Because those are the only 2 things on the internet that I can find referencing The Horse and the Sparrow. I can't find a line of poetry, I can't find a quote from a book. The Horse and the Sparrow refers to trickle-down economics, and specifically how trickle-down economics is BS. And then there is this song that is clearly referencing trickle-down economics and using it in relation to class issues and climate change. This, I imagine, is where Ivy is going to go full goddess. And to prove my point even more about how this Ivy environmentalism arc is going to be the main force of the season, and definitely by the end of the season will be the big ultimate final arc, I'm going to read you the lyrics of The Horse and Sparrow Theory by Victims. They're from Stockholm, Sweden, and they describe themselves as Swedish hardcore crust punk legends. If I'm wrong about this, sorry, it's a very strange coincidence. The Horse and Sparrow Theory by Victims. Where are we going and why do we bleed? We're lost in this game of loss. We are ignorantly absorbing the Earth. The planet's resources decrease out of control, and we are losing our humanity. With our privileged lifestyle, we destroy our world. A hell we will follow, till the end of the end. A hell we will follow. Destruction of the planet is now what we fear, and why do we even breed? The destruction of ourselves is near. We're facing the point of no longer alive, and what do we even do? We're consuming our way till the end. And like, that's very Ivy, right? I feel like I don't need to explain to anyone how that relates to Ivy and how it might relate to a storyline that she's involved in. I do think it's interesting that we are getting comparisons of what it looks like for Harley to talk Ivy down in the same way that Ivy talked Harley down in season 1 and 2. I don't want to say it's hypocritical, but I do think it's interesting to see Harley argue that murder is wrong because innocent people are dying after the Darkseid incident, but here we are. I'm excited to see it regardless, and I'm excited to see how the writers approach this storyline, a storyline that is so often utilised in the comics and not necessarily in a way that I enjoy. And a final thing, you can also see a nice little reference here to the Batcat Colourlinger scene that was cut by DC because heroes don't do that, which I guess settles the argument that Harley can't be a hero then, because Harley definitely does that. If they don't go down on you, dump them. Anyway, this video is stupid. Quick flick through some of the stuff from the trailers that I wanted to talk about. Nothing I don't think a lot of you already know, but I really like hearing your thoughts and talking to you guys. And we only have a week or so left until the show starts, so I thought I'd take this opportunity to get a quick chat with you all in. Thanks as always. I love talking about Harley and Ivy with you guys. Peace out, and let the goddess bless you if you've got this far into this unscripted rant about nothing. Mage out.